Distinguished guests, members of the board, Professor Karageorghis, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, this is a special occasion, the special colloquium out of our ordinary series for two reasons. The reason, number one, is obvious, special speaker, unique speaker, but we'll hear from my colleague in a minute about the profile of the distinguished speaker. Professor Margaridis will expand on that. The few words I want to say is why is special in a second way, special in an institutional way, because Professor Karageorghis was awarded an honorary degree last graduation ceremony we had almost a year ago. In our ritual, the honorary degrees, like the one awarded to Professor Karageorghis and the one awarded to Dr. Andreas Peters, who's with us today, in the ceremony we give the proclamation, but the community to which they are induced through this highest award that our institution bestows on anyone, don't have the chance to hear a lecture, an exposition of their views and their scientific attitude towards a given subject that is close to their field of work and for which, in a very broad sense, is part of the reason that they were awarded this highest distinction. So the proclamation, which was read at the graduation ceremony, said that his contribution to the establishment, development, and success of the science and technology and archaeology and culture center, Star C of the Cyprus Institute, has been formative and of critical significance. An esteemed member of its scientific expert panel and faculty, Professor Karageorghis has helped shape the vision and growth of Star C into a regional center of excellence for science and technology in archaeology and cultural heritage, and his generous advice has guided Cyprus Institute staff and doctoral candidates. Testimony to his wholehearted engagement in his active leadership in key projects such as the Digital Ancient Cypriot Literature Project and the PITAS Registry for Cypriot Antiquities in foreign museums are only a few of the examples of his seminal engagement with our institute. On a personal note, I have been very fortunate. It's one of the really very fortunate encounters in my life. I have known Vassos many, many years before the start of the Cyprus Institute, but our true friendship and entanglement intensifies by the day since the year 2000, when I visited him in his office and said that with Professor Karageorghis, there is going to be this new institute, and in this domain, no other person can help more than you can. I said, you are the Nestor of Cypriot archaeology. This is the word he used there. And you have offered many. This is one more thing we want you to help us with. And he has been true. And we are very proud through this award of the degree, of the highest, the honorary doctoral degree, that he's acknowledged as a formal member of our academic community. I'll stop here because you're here to hear Professor Karageorghis, not me. Few introductory remarks about his very expansive work, which again is going to be short if we're going to hear him talk, will be given by my colleague, Professor Margaridis. Thank you, Vassos. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Professor Karageorghis needs no introduction to this audience here today, or to any of our YouTube viewers who have even basic knowledge of the archaeology of Cyprus or are related to classical studies, let alone the actual archaeologists around the world. He does not want me to say this, but I'm going to disobey his instructions, but he's a legend who influenced, shaped, and disseminated the archaeology of Cyprus. Because of him, Cypriot archaeology got a very prominent place at the various schools of archaeological thought. Professor Karageorghis received his education from the University of London, his BA, PhD, and certificate in practical archaeology. He served in the Department of Antiquities of the Republic of Cyprus between 1952 and 1989, and he was a director of the department from 1963 to 1989. From then until 2010, he was the director of the Leventis Foundation in Nicosia. In 1992, he undertook the initiative for the establishment of the Archaeological Research Unit of the University of Cyprus and served as its first director from 1992 to 1996. He has been a corresponding member or foreign member of the London, Athens, Paris, Stockholm, Madrid, Rome, and Vienna academies, and he has received honorary doctorates from the universities of Oxford, Athens, Brock, Brussels, Dublin, Lyon, Gothenburg, Birmingham, and of course, as Professor Papanikolas from us, here at the Cyprus Institute. Professor Karageorghis excavated extensively in Cyprus from 1952 to 1989, and recently from 2010 to 2011. He is currently an adjunct professor at the Cyprus Institute, and he is involved in projects in collaboration with several colleagues, such as Professor Papanikolas said, in the Cypriot Antiquities in Foreign Museums, which is undertaken in close collaboration with the Department of Antiquities and kindly sponsored by Dr. Andreas Pitas. And this program concerns the creation of a digital initiative that will make collections of Cypriot antiquities in foreign museums known to scholars and the general public. During the lifespan of his career, he has received several prizes, including the Onassis in 1991, and he's the author of more than 100 books and about 500 articles. His impressive work has not stopped, and currently he's working in several fronts, and he's still visiting various excavations. I hope that we're going to have our visit again this year at Hala Sultan Teke. We're doing this every year together. And he goes not only because he's invited because of, out of respect, but because of his vast knowledge of the material culture of Cyprus and the region. So Professor Karageorghis, thank you very much for this colloquium today, and the floor is yours.
Mr. President, dear Kostas, thank you very much. Evie, thank you very much for your encomium. I was hoping that you were going to omit a long presentation, but I'm afraid you did not listen to me. During the last few years, I avoided giving public lectures because I felt that I had nothing very important to say. But I could not refuse the invitation by the president of the Institute to give this talk after the honorary doctorate which was conferred upon me last year. I still don't have anything important to say, and not only that, but I know that many of you will not agree with what I am going to say. I assure you I will not take it as a personal offense. Archaeology is not, strictly speaking, an exact science, in spite of the many scientific characteristics which it has acquired, especially in recent years as a result of its occasional cohabitation with scientific disciplines. It remains a branch of humanistic studies aiming at the investigation of all aspects of human life of past periods. In this respect, it proceeds side by side with disciplines like history and anthropology. Though it is playing a very important role in the research which we mentioned above, that is, all aspects of human life in periods of the past, it has gained respectability comparatively recently as a result of its very close connections with ancient history. This having been said, however, we should remember that historians like Thucydides felt the need to investigate archaeologically, as far as it was possible for him during the period he was writing about the Peloponnesian War, the kind of life the older generations of the Greeks, the weapons they used, etc. It is because of this that the first book of his histories is known as Archaeologia. There is more archaeological flavor in the history of the Persian Wars written by Herodotus, who tried to describe all that he could find out about the life of the people who were involved in these wars, both Greeks and barbarians. For a long time, archaeologists confined their research to the artistic production of the peoples whose lives they were investigating, but gradually their interest spread to other aspects of lives, like the exchange of all kinds of goods, both of cultural and economic interest. Those who studied the archaeology of the Greeks at a very early stage of their research had to explain the effects of the contact of the Greeks with Asia Minor, Phoenicia, and Egypt, and thus the horizon of investigation was changing at all the time. Thus, archaeology acquired many phases and scopes of research and became the discipline which we know today. The vastness of archaeological material inevitably split into numerous specializations of archaeological research based mainly on chronological, regional, and typological considerations. This took place mainly during the 20th century, but archaeological research never remained static. Fashions in all human activities change, and archaeology is not an exception. What we call classical archaeology, which is the archaeology of the Greek and Roman worlds, was dominated to a large extent during the 19th and a good part of the 20th century by the study of works of art like the sculptures of the Parthenon, the painted Attic pottery, the architecture of the Roman Empire, all blended with important events of ancient history. This, however, could not continue forever, and students of the past in general soon realized that the history of human life was not confined to works of art and impressive architecture, but the whole spectrum of ordinary people in their everyday life. In this research, archaeologists felt the need to seek the assistance of other scholarly disciplines, mostly the applied sciences, in order to investigate archaeological remains relating to human diet, human diseases, exploitation and use of metal, the chronology of artifacts and their provenance, to mention only a few of the characteristics of this mainly late 20th and early 21st century archaeology. It is in this spirit the Star Sea of the Cyprus Institute was born for the application of science and technology to archaeology. The computer is now the main tool in the hands of researchers of all kinds, and no respectable archaeologist does not carry one in the study or in the field. Old-fashioned archaeologists like myself, who cannot use this new tool, feel extremely embarrassed and in total disadvantage. Archaeologists of my generation, at least many of us, are left with a single tool, the written evidence for help in our archaeological research. I, however, at the age of 90, after having lived the period before and after the archaeological revolution, which I described above, I may be allowed to give an advice to the younger generation. The technological advancement should certainly be followed very closely. It helps to discover and define aspects of ancient life with precision and rapidity never attained before, but this is not enough. Do not put aside Homer, Herodotus, and all the written evidence and keep only technology, the applied science, and the computer. At the Cyprus Institute, we felt the need to pay attention to the written word from the very beginning of its existence. One of the first major projects which we have undertaken was the digital ancient Cypriot literature project. Learning about the past is a complex affair, and those whose task is to search for it should use complex methods. Learning all about the pottery types used at a specific period, often with the help of a computer, is not enough if we do not extend our research to the people who made it and used it. This long excursus, which I have attempted as an introduction to my lecture, aimed at demonstrating not only the possibility but also the necessity for an interplay between art and literature, between the cultural heritage of all kinds with modern technologies and applied sciences. If we attempt to throw light on the world of the Mediterranean, and particularly the world of Cyprus and the Aegean, during what is known as the Dark Ages, or the geometric period, we should take into consideration not only the types of pottery or tools which people used during this period, but also all the credible witnesses of this period. One such witness, who also reached the highest peak of artistic expression, is Homer. He is universally acknowledged as the greatest European poet of all times, and Homeric epic, that is the Iliad and the Odyssey, together with the Homeric hymns, are taught at schools since antiquity. Fascinating teachers and students alike. The German philosopher Dietrich von Schiller, who lived during the second half of the 18th century, wrote with a dose of exaggeration that those who read the 23rd book of the Iliad should not complain that they lived in vain. The Homeric epic was the source of inspiration for classical Greek and later literature, and continues to feed the intellectual creations of mankind. Endless discussions have been published in philological journals about a number of relevant problems. If, for example, there was ever one poet named Homer, or there were many poets whose works were assembled by one man, who thus created what is known to us as the Iliad and the Odyssey. This was the well-known Homeric problem, which dominated philological discussions for more than a century, destroying in many ways the charm of epic. Homeric studies changed when the methodology of research changed and when philology sought the assistance of archaeology. In 1950, an Oxford scholar, H.L. Lorimer, published a book entitled Homer and the Monuments. The author did not discuss problems of grammar and syntax, but of the material culture encountered in the epics, objects of daily life, the burial customs, arms and armor of warriors, etc. With this publication, a new scholarly branch in the field of classics was created, known as Homeric archaeology. A few years afterwards, a German archaeologist, Hans Gunther Buchholz, known to us from his active involvement with Cypriot archaeology, started the publication of a series of monographs on various aspects of topics of life and the material culture in the time of Homer, such as arms and armor, jewelry, dress, furniture, houses, burial customs, etc., under the general title Archaeologia Homerica. It was exactly then, during the 1960s, that we were discovering Homeric burial customs in the royal necropolis of Salamis, including the ivory furniture from Tomb 79, which I published in one of the volumes of this series. Cypriot archaeology became one of the main contributors of material both for Lorimer's book and the series Archaeologia Homerica. The decipherment of the Mycenaean Linear B script by Michael Ventris in 1952 and the increase of excavations in the Aegean, Cyprus and the Syro-Palestine broadened the horizon of archaeological research and contributed to the collapse of the artificial barrier which separated the world of the Aegean and the world of the Near East, which included Cyprus and the Syro-Palestine. My own teacher of ancient Greek at University College London, T.B.L. Webster, introduced new chapters in the study of Mycenaean archaeology and the Homeric epic in his book From Mycenae to Homer. Other British scholars like Vincent Desborough and Nicholas Coldstream never failed to mention the importance of Cyprus in Homeric archaeology and very often refer to the excavations of the Department of Antiquities in the Royal Necropolis of Salamis. From the 1960s onwards, studies relating to Homeric archaeology occupy an important part of archaeological research. I would like to mention in particular an article by Hector Cadling, a great specialist of late Bronze Age Cyprus, published in a volume dedicated to Emily Townsend Vermeulen in 1998, entitled Heroes Returned with a question mark, Subminoan Burials from Crete. In this article, Cadling discussed objects which were found in the tombs of the 11th century BC in the North Cemetery of Knossos and proposed that, I quote, the heroes of the North Cemetery tombs 186 and 201 could have spent part of their lives in Cyprus, where they might have been children or ethnic Cretans born and buried in Cyprus, or they might have started their lives in Crete and returned there after a prolonged absence, of which part, or at least, was spent in Cyprus, end quote. In this article, Cadling enumerates objects which were probably taken to the Aegean by heroes on their return from the Trojan War. He refers in particular to the adventures of Menelaus in the 4th book of the Odyssey. I quote, "My travels took me to Cyprus, to Phoenicia, and to Egypt. Ethiopians, Sidonians, Arabi. I visited them all, and I saw Libya. Thus, one could start explaining the enigma of the objects of an older period found in tombs. Archaeologists started speaking about heirlooms in the material words of Homer, many of which were of Cypriot provenance. In 2013, the British archaeologist James Whitley brought up for discussion the problem of objects described by Homer, which date much earlier than the period when Homer lived, namely the 8th century BC. He proposed a differentiation between objects kept in the same family for several generations and the objects he called entangled objects or antiques, which are collected from many lands, including Cyprus and the Near East. I hope this long introduction has been helpful for interpreting the role of Cyprus in Homeric archaeology. As already mentioned, this branch of archaeology continues to attract the interest of the archaeologists and philologists. In 2008, a very successful exhibition was organized in Karlsruhe in Germany with the title Zeit der Helden, the Age of Heroes, with objects dating from about 1200 to 700 BC. Cyprus occupied an important part of the exhibition and the catalogue. In order to illustrate the topic of my lecture, I will use mainly objects discovered at Palepafos and from Salamis. Palepafos was a prosperous city during the late Bronze Age, about the middle of the second millennium BC. It received immigrants from the Aegean about 1200 BC, like other urban centers in the island, who settled there peacefully and contributed towards its development and prosperity. It entered the Iron Age, which corresponds to the early geometric period in the Aegean, in the 11th century BC, without any signs of interruption, but with strong phenomena of cultural and political innovations, which were caused by the new settlers from the Aegean, which I mentioned above. Our information about the early phase of life in Palepafos derives mainly from tombs, as is the case with other parts of the island. The famous sanctuary of Aphrodite was excavated there at the end of the 19th century by a British mission, but very little has been published about this excavation and its finds. The ancient cemeteries of Palepafos suffered from the disastrous effects of tomb looters, who unfortunately continue their unlawful work to the present day. A number of tombs were excavated by a British mission in the 1950s, but these excavations have never been fully published. Leveling operation at Skales on the southeast of the present day village of Kuklia brought to light a number of tombs which were subsequently looted. Oh. I'm not very good in manipulating this. A second large-scale excavation was undertaken at Plakes, or a leveling operation at site Skales on the southeast of the present-day village of Kuklia brought to light a number of tombs which were subsequently looted, but this obliged the Department of Antiquities to undertake large-scale excavation there in 1979, the results of which were published by myself and in 1983. It is thanks to these excavations that the great importance of Palepafos for Homeric archaeology was first attested. A second large-scale excavation was undertaken at site Plakes, 2.5 kilometers west of Skales in 1999, and later by the Department of Antiquities under Stathis Raptou. It is now accepted that during the Cyprogeometric I period, that is from 1050 to 750 BC, a number of small communities with their own independent cemeteries constituted the kingdom of Palepofos. Some of these excavations and others carried out by Stathis Raptou in 2000 and later at site Skales have been published by Raptou and myself in 2 volumes in the series of the Cyprus Institute publications in 2014 and 2016 respectively, and in the form of articles in archaeological journals. The early 11th century BC was an important period of prosperity for Palepofos, as far as one may judge from the contents of the new tombs excavated in the area at the site Xylinos and Skales. The pottery which was brought to light from this excavation, known as proto-white painted ware. It is of excellent ceramic quality with clear influences from the Aegean, but also from the Syro-Palestine, an area with which Cyprus continued to have connections throughout the late Bronze Age. It is interesting to note that this pottery from Palepofos bears a striking resemblance with that of the eastern part of the island, namely that of Alaas, northeast of Salamis. It will be interesting to undertake a neutron activation analysis of specimens from both regions to specify whether it was made in one of these 2 places or in both. Young archaeologists and Star C, please note. It should be noted that the monumental sanctuary of Aphrodite, constructed with large ashlar blocks of stone, which was built at the beginning of the 12th century BC, continued functioning as late as the Roman period, and its fame reached both the Aegean and the East. It was known to Homer, who mentions it in the Odyssey. Homer also mentions Kinyras, the mythical king of Paphos, who sent as a gift a richly decorated cuirass to King Agamemnon, the leader of the Achaeans in the Trojan War. Homer describes this cuirass in great detail in the 11th book of the Iliad. I will not be able to refer during this lecture to all the discoveries at Palepofos connected with the Homeric epic. These are found in the tombs of important members of society, mainly descendants of the Aegean immigrants who settled there after the collapse of the Mycenaean Empire. But we should not exclude the possibility that these Aegean burial customs may have also been imitated by the local prosperous Palepathians. The male aristocrats of the Cyprogeometric period must have been also good warriors who were buried together with their arms and armor. We mention as an example the tomb gifts of Plakes tomb 44, dating to the Cyprogeometric I period. They included a pair of bronze cheek pieces with perforations all along their perimeter for fixing at their inside surface a smooth material, cloth or leather. Similar cheek pieces were found in tombs of the same period at Kaloriziki near Kourion and at Tiryns in the Peloponnese. These cheek pieces were not hinged to a helmet of metal, but of leather. Homer knew of this type of helmet, which existed some 2 or 300 years before his times. He refers to them both in the Iliad and the Odyssey when he describes the Achaean soldiers as halkoparii, wearing helmets with bronze cheek pieces. Skalle's tomb 188, also of the Cypriotic I period, yielded a bronze conical helmet with an opening at the top for fixing feathers, probably of various colors. This, together with the shining surface of the helmet, must have produced an impressive effect. The helmet worn by Hector must have been of this type. Homer refers to him as Korytheolos, who wears a crested helmet. In Plakia's tomb 144, several thin sheets of bronze were found. They have an elliptical or rectangular shape with perforations all around their perimeter for fixing on leather or cloth. They may have decorated cuirasses worn by warriors. Homer refers to the Achaean warriors as chalkochitones, who wear cuirasses decorated with bronze ornaments. In the same Plakia's tomb 144, two pairs of bronze discs with a central carinated boss and a perforation at the top were also found. They correspond to the Homeric phalara, usually interpreted as shield bosses. They are known in the Aegean from the end of the 13th century BC and appear also at Enkomi about the 12th century, about 1200 BC. In several tombs of Palepaphos and other parts of Cyprus, dating to the Cypriotic I period, bronze spearheads were found with a double-edged blade and a midrib and a tubular socket for fixing a wooden shaft. Such spearheads were introduced to Cyprus from the Aegean. They are of a type known to Homer, who called it dolichoskion, because of its shaft, which would cast a long shadow. Similar weapons with a small spearhead like this were used for hunting wild animals. They are called javelins and are known in Homeric epic as weapons for hunting goats, hence their name eganei, or for athletics. In 1970, together with Buchholz, we published a Mycenaean shirt known as showing an eganei. It was previously believed that the eganei was a weapon of the 7th century BC. Bathtubs were introduced to Cyprus towards the end of the late Bronze Age. They were carved in soft limestone or were made of clay. In the Aegean, bathtubs had a long tradition in Minoan and Mycenaean palaces. In Cyprus, we encountered them in tombs, but also in houses, and we believe that they were introduced to the island by Aegean immigrants. In Palepaphos, one clay bath was found in the sanctuary of Aphrodite and was probably used for ritual. Others were found in tombs. At Enkomi, Pylagokinokremos, and Ma Palekastro, we have them in houses. The most impressive bathtub from Palepaphos was found in tomb 49 and it was carved out of a single monolith. The one at the bottom. I show you one which was found recently also at Palepaphos. In Homeric epic, offering a bath was considered as the proper way of welcoming a guest. When Odysseus visited the palace of Alkinos in the island of the Phaeacians, Queen Arete ordered her servants to put a large cauldron on fire and fill the bathtub with hot water. The Homeric word for a bathtub is asaminthos. Bathtubs and bronze cauldrons were used by Palepathians already in the 11th and 10th century BC. Think of Versailles. In Homeric epic, we often encounter the bronze tribody cauldrons, which were used for boiling water for the bath. One such cauldron was found in Scales tomb 58, dating to the 11th century BC. A leg of a similar cauldron was found at Enkomi in a 12th century BC context. Bronze tripodic cauldrons were known at Mycenae and elsewhere in the Argolith, dating to the protogeometric period. This is yet another case of objects mentioned by Homer, which were used in the Aegean and Cyprus 300 years before Homer's time. Many years later, we encounter bronze cauldrons in the Aegean, richly decorated, which were used as gifts or prizes in athletic games. In Cyprus, we know one such cauldron from Salamis, tomb 79, dating to the 8th century BC. In the 13th book of the Homeric Odyssey, Homer refers to one such tribodic cauldron which was given as a gift to Odysseus by the Phoenicians, tripoda megan ide levita. Anointing the body with perfumed oil was a well-known custom both in the Aegean and Cyprus, and this custom is often encountered in Homer. The oil was kept in small clay vases with a narrow neck and a broad mouth, so that only a small quantity could be poured out in the hand when the vase was turned upside down. These vases are known as stirrup jars. They were found throughout the Mediterranean region as a result of trade in perfume oils, which were also used during symposia and for anointing the body after a bath or preparing it for burial. Symposia, which included the consumption of food and drink, were part of the lifestyle of Mycenaean aristocrats, but also of the elite in Cyprus and Syro-Palestine from the late Bronze Age onwards. The symposium had a religious, social, and political and economic connotation, and is reflected in the tombs of the elite in Palepafos and elsewhere. There are practically no tombs without craters, drinking cups, and dishes, indicating the number of persons taking part in these symposia before or after a burial ceremony. These vases were usually of clay, but when the family of the deceased could afford it, bronze vessels were used, like this small amphoriscos, this large amphora decorated in relief, and this kylix, which appears also in clay but also in bronze. An indispensable element of a Homeric symposium was the roasted meat. In the 9th book of the Iliad, Homer describes in detail the preparation of meat for roasting. This, as you can imagine, recalls scenes of contemporary Cyprus where we preserve with great devotion this Homeric custom known today as souvla. Here we have a bundle of iron oveloi from 12 oveloi from Salamis, and also the kratefte. iron skewers and their supports, known in Homer as obeloi and kratefte, the supports of the obeloi, respectively, were found in Salamis in the Dromos of tomb 79, dating to the late 8th century BC. The discovery in 1979 of 3 bronze obeloi at Palepaphos Scales in tomb 49, dating to the 11th to 10th century BC, is of enormous importance. On one of these obeloi, the Greek name Opheltas is engraved in the Cypriot syllabary, thus indicating that this language was spoken by a part of the population at least as early as the 11th century BC. Bronze and iron obeloi of this early period have been found at Kaloriziki, Kition, and Lapithos. The obelos of Opheltis has already taken a prominent place in the history of Cyprus. The fact that she, a Peloponnesian, engraved his name on it constitutes a symbolic act indicating very proudly his ethnic provenance. The name Opheltis is particular to the Peloponnese. Apart from the rich tombs of warriors, many tombs of women have been excavated at Palepaphos. Among the tomb offerings which they revealed, we mention gold jewelry of all kinds. In the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, reference is made to the rich jewelry worn by the goddess and her priestesses, particularly the gold crowns. Aphrodite wears eftichton Stephanin, Kalin, Chrysein. Similar crowns were worn by the priestess of the goddess at Palepaphos, who were members of aristocratic families. We know from Pinda that King Kiniras himself was the high priest of the goddess. In some tombs excavated at Kales and Plakes, a number of plaques of thin sheets of gold were embossed with embossed decoration representing the head of the Egyptian goddess Hathor were found. This Egyptian goddess is the Oriental equivalent of Aphrodite Astarte. Others represent a draped woman wearing a crown. They were joined together with a thin wire of copper. We know that Homer knew and admired the art of the Phoenicians, which by this time was widely used in the Mediterranean. Other gold plaques also found in tombs of Palepaphos are in the shape of rosettes. They were probably fixed on clothes, hence the Homeric pharia chrysا. It is a fact that much of the information which we have about life in the ancient world, as we mentioned above, comes from cemeteries. The tombs of the royal necropolis of Salamis, for example, have enriched enormously our knowledge about the wealth and importance of Salamis in the 8th and 7th centuries BC. If Salamis has won the title Homeric for the Cypro-Archaic period, the same would be suitable for Palepaphos for the Cypro-Geometric period, 2 or 3 centuries before Homer. In fact, the title of this lecture could easily be Homeric Palepaphos before Homer, however absurd this may sound. One of the most important burial customs which we observed in the royal necropolis of Salamis is the sacrifice of chariots and horses in front of the facade of the funerary chambers in what we call the dromos. This custom is described in detail in the 23rd book of the Iliad in preparation of the funeral of Patroclus. It is observed in archaic Palepaphos, in tomb 7, in a tomb of the 7th century BC at Kato Alonia. In Greece, the specific the sacrifice of horses occurs already in the Mycenaean period and the early Iron Age. There is a long tradition of human inhumation in the burial customs of ancient Cyprus. Incineration appears all of a sudden in the 11th and 10th centuries BC, and only in a few instances at Palepafos and Kaloriziki. This is clearly an Aegean burial custom which was introduced to Cyprus by Aegean immigrants. In Homer, it is mentioned in association with the burial of important persons such as Patroclus and Achilles. Detailed reports about incineration at Palepafos appear in the final publication of the excavations. The incinerated remains of the dead were placed usually in clay amphorae, but in the Aegean and Cyprus we have also in some cases bronze amphorae. More frequent are the bronze lids of amphorae, which appear both in Cyprus and in Crete. They are in the shape of a shield. And are dated from the 10th to the century BC onwards. Some bear traces of cloth. As you can see there, in which the incinerated remains were wrapped before placing in the amphorae, a practice which is well attested in Homeric epic. We have similar instances in burials in Crete, at Eleftheria, and also here at Salamis. Sorry. I lost it. Anybody can find it? Can recover it? Anybody can help me to recover the last slide? It is widely accepted that the Greek immigrants who settled in Cyprus in the 12th century BC, after the collapse of the Mycenaean period, brought with them cultural and political traditions and a lifestyle in general which had a serious impact on local Cypriot lifestyle and gradually changed the island's cultural development. I have already stressed the fact that Homer draws much from earlier happenings in the Greek world, from the Mycenaean heroic age and what is known as the Trojan War. Memories of these earlier periods were brought to Cyprus by the immigrants after the end of the Trojan War, as I mentioned earlier. These they preserved in their new home and cherished them as part of their heroic past, which we call Homeric, and some of these were adopted also by the local Cypriot population. It doesn't matter, it is the last. I hope I have been able to paint for you a picture, though faint, of the above described phenomenon of Homeric Cyprus and its conservative milieu in the Cyprogeometric period. As a matter of fact, Palépaphos still remembered its heroic past down to the 5th century BC. While in the capital of the classical world, that is Athens, the folk craftsmen were still inspired by the myths of the Trojan War in the decoration of Attic vases. In Palépaphos, a humble sculptor of a limestone sarcophagus found in a tomb at Katou Alonia, which we cannot see because it has disappeared, used the same myths to decorate its 4 sides in relief. Dear President of the Cyprus Institute, colleagues, students and friends, this is a 5th century BC sarcophagus, BC, decorated with a Homeric myth, the escape of the heroes on all 4 sides. In the Laudatio, which was read at the graduation ceremony of the 22nd of October of 2018, I was praised, and I quote, for my wholehearted engagement and my active leadership in key projects such as the digital ancient Cypriot literature and the Beated Registry of Cypriot Antiquities in foreign museums. In spite of my incompetence of matters of new technologies, I have become a strong supporter of the Cyprus Institute and its Star C for the application of new scientific technologies in archaeology, without which archaeological research was facing stagnation. But in closing the topic of this lecture, as pointed out in my introduction, I intended to underline my anxiety, having witnessed some tendencies among young researchers to go to the other extreme. And that's where some of you may not agree with me. And believe that the application of technological methods can be a goal by itself. This lecture is a warning that archaeology needs the collaboration of many disciplines in order to paint a true picture of the life of the ancient world, in the ancient world, the achievements of people in the past. Traditional archaeology may reveal only a limited aspects of what we aim at. We need to collaborate with human anthropologists, bioarchaeologists, zooarchaeologists, dendrochronologists, apply the carbon-14 method, neutron activation analysis, the analysis of materials, to mention only a few of the technologies which we should be applied and for which one can find facilities at the Cyprus Institute. In a few words, we need a broad collaboration. We know that your computer is your best partner, but my advice is do not forget to put in its black bag also a few books which are the living witnesses of the past. Homer, Herodotus, Thucydides, Athenaeus, Strabo, and do not forget the Bible if you are dealing with the Near East. Nobody will accuse you of being old-fashioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Karageorghis, for all this and showing us what you have been doing at Palépaphos. also will appreciate that. So, questions? Lindy?
Thank you, Vassos. That was very interesting. I'm really taken by the gold plaques with Hathor and the female figure, and you said they were attached with copper wire.
Yes, above, in all four sides, we have gold wire, copper wire, very thin wire. At the top, it is continuous, so that they all joined together, or 5 of them, for instance, so that they could form a crown at the upper part and the lower part. And also on the vertical sides, so that they are fixed firmly together. There is one, such crowns are worn by one of the female figures illustrated on one of these plaques with a full human figure.
What was the language at that time?
In the 11th century, we have evidence that part of the population of Cyprus spoke Greek. On the bronze obelos from Palepafos, which I showed to you, we have the Greek, the proper name of Tuopheltu, in a form of Greek which is not the Mycenaean Koine, but the dialect of Argos, Opeleta U. Each sign represents a syllable. That is Tuopheltu. I am the obelos of Opheltis. I don't propose that overnight the whole of the population of Cyprus started speaking Greek. This was a start, and we have evidence, mythical evidence, that the cities of Cyprus were founded by heroes after the Trojan War, and that Paphos was founded by Agapino, the king of the Tegeans after the Trojan War. So behind the myth there is the historical event, and that's how in archaeology, with careful consideration, we could use the myth in order to help archaeology, that at Palepafos we have the first evidence for the use of this archive dialect, which gradually spread throughout of Cyprus and is known as the Cypriot dialect in the classical period.
But they did not use the Greek alphabet at the beginning.
The Greek alphabet was introduced much later, very sporadically in the 5th century BC, and certainly quite widely under the leadership of Evagoras of Salamis and the other kings of the island, when the Cypriots became conscious of their ethnicity and revolted against the Persians.
Anybody else? Before we thank Professor Karageorghis again, I would like to inform you that Dr. Andreas Pitas, that also received the honorary doctorate together with Professor Karageorghis, is going to deliver a lecture about El Greco on the 5th of June. So we're going to announce it
5th of
soon.
June.
Yes, 5th of June, a Wednesday, and not a Thursday. So Professor Karageorghis, thank you very much again. Thank you for that.